Emma sat quietly in the back corner of her seventh-grade classroom at Riverside Middle School, trying to blend into the worn fabric of her desk chair. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded navy t-shirt that had seen better days. While other students chatted excitedly about their weekend plans, Emma kept her eyes focused on her textbook, hopping to avoid attention. A stern woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, walked between the rows of desks handing back graded assignments. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor with each purposeful step. When she reached Emma's desk, she paused and looked down at the paper in her hand with obvious disapproval. "Emma," Mrs. announced loudly, making sure the entire class could hear. "Your essay about Career Day was completely unacceptable." She slammed the paper down on Emma's desk, revealing a large red F circled multiple times at the top. Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment as 28 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. She glanced down at her essay, titled, "My Hero, Lieutenant Sarah, Navy SEAL," and felt her heart sink. She had spent hours writing about her mother's service, trying to capture how proud she was of the woman who had sacrificed so much for their country. "Stand up when I'm talking to you," Mrs. demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Emma slowly rose from her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of her desk. "You wrote that your mother is a Navy SEAL," Mrs. continued, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you really expect me to believe such nonsense? Women cannot be Navy SEALs, Emma. They simply don't have what it takes for that kind of work." Several students began to snicker, and Emma felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She had always been taught to respect her teachers, but something deep inside her bristled at hearing her mother's accomplishments dismissed so carelessly. "But my mom really is a SEAL," Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She graduated from training 2 years ago. She's deployed right now in—" "That's enough," Mrs. cut her off with a harsh laugh. "I don't know what fantasy stories your mother has been telling you, but I won't tolerate lies in my classroom. Women in the military serve in support roles, not as elite warriors. Your mother might be in the Navy, but she's certainly not a SEAL." The laughter from Emma's classmates grew louder, and she could hear whispered comments like, "Emma's mom thinks she's a superhero. And what a joke." Tyler, the class bully, made exaggerated combat noises while pretending to crawl on the floor. Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "My mother isn't lying," she said, her voice growing stronger despite her fear. "She earned her trident. She completed Hell Week and all the training phases. She can hold her breath underwater for 4 minutes and carry a full pack for 20 miles. Mrs. face reddened with irritation. "Young lady, you need to stop this ridiculous charade immediately. I've been teaching for 25 years and I know what I'm talking about. The military has standards, and those standards exist for good reasons. Women simply don't belong in combat roles." "The Navy changed their policy," Emma protested, remembering the news articles her mother had shown her. "They opened SEAL training to women who could meet the same standards as men. My mom was one of the first to make it through." "Impossible," Mrs. scoffed. "Even if such a policy existed, which I doubt, no woman could actually complete that training. It requires physical strength and mental toughness that women simply don't possess. You're embarrassing yourself with these fantasies." Emma felt hot tears rolling down her cheeks now, but she refused to back down. "My mom has medals," she said desperately. "She has photos from her graduation. She showed me her gear and explained all the different missions she's trained for." "Enough," Mrs. shouted, causing several students to jump in their seats. "I will not have this disruption in my classroom any longer. Since you insist on maintaining this elaborate lie, you'll write a 5-page essay about the real roles women serve in the military. You'll research actual facts instead of made-up stories about female Navy SEALs." She turned to address the rest of the class, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "This is exactly why it's important to verify information before believing everything you hear. Some people will say anything to make themselves seem more important than they really are." Emma sank back into her chair, her entire body shaking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. She stared at the red F on her paper and felt a burning determination growing in her chest. Her mother had taught her to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Emma said, her voice cutting through the teacher's continued lecture. "What if I could prove that my mother really is a Navy SEAL?" The classroom fell completely silent. Mrs. turned slowly, her eyebrows raised in surprise at Emma's boldness. "Excuse me," the teacher said coldly. Emma took a deep breath, thinking about all the stories her mother had shared about never giving up in the face of adversity. I said, "What if I could prove that my mother really is a Navy SEAL? Would you apologize for calling her a liar?" Mrs. let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the quiet room. "Oh, this should be interesting. Yes, miss, if you can provide actual proof that your mother is a Navy SEAL, real evidence, not some photos that could be fake, then I will gladly apologize." "And if I prove it, will you change my grade on the essay?" Emma asked, her confidence growing. "Fine," Mrs. agreed with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But when you can't provide this imaginary proof, you'll write that 5-page essay and apologize to the entire class for disrupting our learning environment with your tall tailies." Emma nodded firmly. "Deal, I'll bring proof tomorrow." As the bell rang and students began filing out of the classroom, Emma gathered her belongings with determination. She ignored the mocking comments from her classmates and focused on the task ahead. Her mother had always told her that actions spoke louder than words, and tomorrow she would let her actions do all the talking. That evening, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her grandmother, Maria, who had been taking care of her while her mother was deployed overseas. The older woman listened patiently as Emma explained what had happened at school, her weathered hands folded gently in her lap. Her grandmother said softly, "Some people have small minds and can't imagine that the world is bigger than what they've always known. Your mother is serving our country with honor, and that teacher's ignorance doesn't change that truth." "But Abuela, I need to prove it," Emma insisted. "I can't let her say those things about Mom and get away with it. It's not fair." Maria smiled and reached across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. "Your mother would be very proud of how you stood up for her today. Let me make some phone calls tonight. I think it's time your teacher learned exactly who Lieutenant Sarah really is." As Emma went to bed that night, she had no idea that her grandmother was already setting in motion events that would change everything. Maria had her own connections from her late husband's military service, and she knew exactly who to call when her family's honor was being questioned. The next morning would bring surprises that neither Emma nor Mrs. could have imagined. Emma arrived at school the next morning with a manila envelope tucked carefully in her backpack. Her grandmother had spent most of the previous evening making phone calls, speaking in hushed tones to various military contacts. When Emma asked what she was planning, Maria had simply smiled and said, "Sometimes the truth needs a little help revealing itself." The morning classes passed slowly, with Emma barely able to concentrate on math or science. Several classmates made snide comments about her pretend SEAL mom, but Emma just smiled mysteriously and said they would all find out the truth soon enough. When lunch period arrived, Emma noticed something unusual happening in the school's front office. Through the large windows, she could see Principal Johnson packing back and forth, talking rapidly on the phone. His normally calm demeanor seemed rattled, and he kept glancing toward the main entrance as if expecting someone important to arrive. As Emma walked past the office on her way to the cafeteria, she caught fragments of the principal's conversation. "Yes, I understand. Multiple vehicles. Absolutely will accommodate. No media without permission." She hurried along before anyone noticed her eavesdropping, but her heart began racing with anticipation. In the cafeteria, Emma barely touched her sandwich. Her stomach was too twisted with nervous energy to eat anything. She kept checking the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes until her English class with Mrs. Whatever her grandmother had arranged, Emma sensed it was going to be bigger than she had imagined. Tyler slid into the seat across from her, wearing his usual smirk. "So, did you bring your fake proof today? I can't wait to see what kind of pictures you printed off the internet." "You'll see," Emma replied calmly, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "My dad says women in the military are just there for show," Tyler continued, clearly trying to provoke her. "They can't do the real fighting like men can." Emma looked at him with pity rather than anger. "Your dad doesn't know what he's talking about either, but that's okay because some people are about to get educated." The lunch bell rang, and Emma gathered her things with deliberate slowness. As she walked through the hallways toward her English classroom, she noticed several teachers whispering in small groups, their voices urgent and excited. Something was definitely happening. Mrs. was already at her desk when Emma entered the classroom, grading papers with her usual stern expression. She looked up when Emma approached her desk. Well, miss, I hope you've prepared your apology for yesterday's disruption, Mrs. said, without looking up from her red pen. I assume you've realized that your little fantasy about your mother isn't going to hold up under scrutiny. Actually, Mrs., I brought that proof you asked for, Emma replied, pulling the manila envelope from her backpack. Mrs. sighed heavily and set down her pen. Very well, let's get this over with quickly so we can move on to today's lesson. Emma opened the envelope and pulled out several official-looking documents. This is my mother's DD-214 discharge form from her previous deployment, she began, placing the first paper on Mrs.'s desk. And this is her certificate of completion from basic underwater demolition SEAL training. Mrs. glanced at the papers with obvious skepticism. Anyone can forge documents these days, miss. These could easily be fake. This is her Silver Star citation for valor in combat, Emma continued, placing another document on the desk. She received it for leading a rescue mission that saved 12 civilians from a terrorist compound. The teacher's expression flickered with uncertainty, but she maintained her dismissive tone. I'm not impressed by what could very well be elaborate forgeries. Emma reached into the envelope one final time. And this, she said, pulling out an official photograph, is my mother receiving her trident pin from Admiral during the graduation ceremony. Mrs. face went pale as she stared at the photograph. In it, Lieutenant Sarah stood at attention in her dress uniform while a Navy admiral pinned the distinctive SEAL trident to her chest. The photo was clearly official, with Department of the Navy watermarks and official stamps. This could still be, Mrs. began weakly, but her voice trailed off as she studied the undeniable authenticity of the documents. Just then the classroom intercom crackled to life. Mrs., please send Emma to the main office immediately. Her visitors have arrived. Every student in the classroom turned to look at Emma, who was trying hard to suppress a smile. Mrs. looked confused and slightly annoyed by the interruption. Visitors, the teacher asked. Emma, did your mother arrange some sort of meeting? Actually, Emma said, gathering her papers and backpack. My grandmother made some phone calls last night. She thought my class might benefit from a special presentation about the reality of modern military service. As Emma walked toward the classroom door, she turned back to Mrs. one final time. Oh, and Mrs., you might want to follow me to the office. I think you'll find this educational. The walk from the English classroom to the main office felt like the longest journey of Emma's life. Students and teachers lined the hallways, all craning their necks to see toward the front of the school. Through the large windows, Emma could see why everyone was so excited. Parked in the circular drive in front of Riverside Middle School were 4 black SUVs with military license plates. Standing in formation near the vehicles were 12 individuals in Navy dress uniforms, their bearing unmistakably military and professional. Emma's heart began racing as she recognized the significance of what she was seeing. Her grandmother hadn't just arranged for someone to verify her mother's service record. She had somehow convinced actual Navy SEALs to come to her school. Principal Johnson met Emma at the office door, his face flushed with excitement and nervousness. Miss, I have to admit, when I received the calls this morning about your situation, I never expected this level of response. Through the office windows, Emma could see the group of uniformed personnel organizing themselves into a formal presentation formation. Several carried folders and what appeared to be official presentation materials. Emma, Principal Johnson continued, these and ladies have traveled quite a distance to address what they called misinformation about naval special operations. They've requested to speak to your entire class, as well as any faculty members who might benefit from accurate information about women in combat roles. Mrs. appeared in the office doorway, having followed Emma from the classroom. Her face was ashen, and she kept glancing nervously toward the windows where the military personnel were visible. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding, Mrs. said quickly. This is all completely unnecessary. I'm sure we can resolve this minor classroom issue without involving the military. Commander Jackson, the apparent leader of the group, stepped through the office doors at that moment. He was a tall, imposing figure with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His uniform was decorated with numerous ribbons and medals, including the distinctive trident pin of the Navy SEALs. Good afternoon, Commander Jackson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Commander Michael Jackson, and I'm here representing Naval Special Warfare Command. We understand there's been some question about the service record of Lieutenant Sarah." Mrs. mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Emma had never seen her teacher look so completely speechless. "Lieutenant is currently deployed with SEAL Team 7, Commander Jackson continued, his gaze moving between Emma and Mrs. "She's one of the finest operators I've had the privilege to serve alongside, and her record speaks for itself." He turned to Emma with a slight smile. "Miss, your grandmother contacted our public affairs office last night. She explained that some individuals at your school were questioning your mother's service and achievements. We felt it was important to set the record straight." Emma felt tears of pride and gratitude welling up in her eyes. She had known her grandmother was making phone calls, but she had never imagined anything like this was possible. "Now then," Commander Jackson said, turning back to Principal Johnson, "we'd very much like to address Miss Class and provide some education about the reality of women in naval special operations. We've brought some presentations and materials that should clear up any misconceptions." Principal Johnson nodded eagerly. "Of course, Commander. We'll arrange for the class to meet in our auditorium right away." As the group prepared to move toward the auditorium, Mrs. finally found her voice. "Commander, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. This was just a simple classroom discussion about career possibilities." Commander Jackson's expression grew noticeably cooler as he looked at the teacher. "Ma'am, what I understand is that you publicly humiliated a young student for accurately describing her mother's military service. You called Lieutenant a liar and suggested that women are incapable of serving in elite military units." Mrs. face turned bright red. I simply meant that traditionally." "Ma'am," Commander Jackson interrupted firmly, "with all due respect, your understanding of military capabilities appears to be severely outdated. Perhaps today's presentation will help expand your knowledge base." As they walked toward the auditorium, Emma felt a mixture of vindication and anticipation building inside her chest. She had stood up for her mother's honor, and now the truth was about to be revealed in a way she never could have imagined. Word spread through Riverside Middle School like wildfire. Within minutes, the auditorium was packed with not just Emma's English class, but students and teachers from throughout the school. Principal Johnson had decided that this was too important an educational opportunity to limit to one classroom. Emma found herself seated in the front row, her heart pounding with anticipation and pride. Mrs. sat stiffly beside the other faculty members, her face a mask of barely controlled anxiety. Tyler and his friends were unusually quiet, stealing glances at the impressive group of military personnel setting up their presentation. Commander Jackson stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. Behind him, a large screen displayed the official seal of Naval Special Warfare Command. The auditorium fell completely silent as he began to speak. "Good afternoon, students and faculty of Riverside Middle School," Commander Jackson began, his voice commanding immediate attention. "We're here today because one of your students was questioned about her mother's military service, specifically whether women can serve as Navy SEALs." He clicked a remote, and the screen changed to show a timeline of women in military service. For many years, women were excluded from combat roles not because they couldn't perform them, but because of policies that reflected the attitudes of their time. However, in 2015, all military positions were open to women who could meet the same standards as their male counterparts. Emma glanced sideways at Mrs., whose complexion was growing paler by the minute. "In 2019, Commander Jackson continued, the Navy announced that the first woman had successfully completed the rigorous training required to become a Navy SEAL. Since then, several exceptional women have earned the right to wear the trident." The screen now showed statistics about SEAL training, including the notorious Hell Week that eliminated most candidates regardless of gender. Navy SEAL training has a success rate of approximately 25%. This means that 3 out of every 4 candidates who enter training will not complete it. The standards are the same for everyone, regardless of gender. Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos stepped forward to address the audience. She was a compact, athletic woman whose presence commanded immediate respect. "I completed SEAL training in 2021, she announced. "I'd like to share what that process actually involves." For the next 20 minutes, Petty Officer Santos described the grueling physical and mental challenges of SEAL training. She talked about swimming 2 miles in frigid ocean water, running obstacle courses while carrying heavy packs, and enduring sleep deprivation that tested every candidate's mental resilience. The instructors don't care if you're male or female, she explained. They care whether you can complete the mission and whether your teammates can count on you in life-or-death situations. Tyler raised his hand tentatively. But aren't women naturally weaker than men? Petty Officer Santos smiled at the question. On average, yes, men have greater upper body strength, but SEAL training isn't just about raw strength. It's about endurance, problem-solving under pressure, and the ability to function as part of a team. Some of the strongest men I knew in training couldn't handle the mental pressure and quit during Hell Week. Commander Jackson resumed his position at the podium. Now, I'd like to tell you about one particular SEAL whose service exemplifies the best of what we represent. The screen changed to show an official portrait of a woman in Navy dress uniform, her chest decorated with numerous ribbons and medals. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she recognized her mother's face on the screen. Lieutenant Sarah joined the Navy 8 years ago with the goal of becoming a SEAL, Commander Jackson announced. She completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training with honors and was assigned to SEAL Team 7. The screen now showed images from various training exercises and deployments, though faces were obscured for security reasons. During her first deployment, Lieutenant participated in 12 combat missions. Her leadership and tactical expertise were instrumental in the success of Operation Desert Shield, where her team rescued 14 civilians from a terrorist compound. Emma felt tears of pride streaming down her cheeks as she listened to the detailed account of her mother's service. Around her, students and teachers sat in stunned silence, beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were hearing. For her actions during that deployment, Lieutenant was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, Commander Jackson continued. She has also received the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, and numerous other commendations for her service. The screen now showed an image of the Silver Star Medal, one of the military's highest honors for valor in combat. Mrs. had gone completely white and was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles were visible. Several students were turning to stare at Emma with newfound respect and amazement. Chief Petty Officer Williams, a tall man with kind eyes, stepped forward to address the audience. Lieutenant is currently deployed with her team in a classified location, conducting operations to protect American interests and innocent civilians. She specifically asked us to tell her daughter that she's proud of her for standing up for the truth, even when it was difficult. Emma burst into tears at hearing this message from her mother. Principal Johnson offered her tissues while the other students watched with obvious emotion. Now, Commander Jackson said, his voice taking on a sterner tone, we understand that yesterday Lieutenant's service record was questioned by a faculty member. Her daughter was publicly humiliated and accused of lying about her mother's achievements. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath as Commander Jackson's gaze found Mrs. in the faculty section. Ma'am, would you please stand and identify yourself? Mrs. rose shakily to her feet, her face flushed with embarrassment and shame. I'm Mrs. I teach 7th grade English. Mrs., yesterday you gave Emma an F on an essay about her mother's service. You told the class that women cannot be Navy SEALs and suggested that Lieutenant was lying about her military record. Is this accurate? Mrs.'s voice was barely audible as she responded. Yes, sir, but I didn't know, I thought. Ma'am, you thought what? That a 12-year-old girl would fabricate an elaborate story about her mother's military service. That she would lie about something that could be easily. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Several teachers were looking at Mrs. with obvious disapproval, while students whispered among themselves about what they had witnessed the previous day. Mrs., Commander Jackson continued, your actions yesterday caused real harm to a child whose mother is currently risking her life in service to our country. Emma should have been proud to share her mother's story, not humiliated for telling the truth. Mrs. was now crying openly, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her embarrassment and guilt. However, Commander Jackson said, his tone softening slightly, we're not here to condemn anyone, we're here to educate. Clearly, there are misconceptions about the capabilities of women in the military that need to be addressed. He gestured toward the group of SEALs behind him. 3 of the 12 personnel with us today are women who have successfully completed SEAL training. They serve alongside their male counterparts with distinction and honor. The female SEALs stepped forward, their bearing proud and professional. Emma was amazed to see that these incredible women had come to support her and her mother's reputation. "Mrs. Commander Jackson said, I believe you owe Miss an apology, and I think you also owe her an A on that essay, since every fact she wrote about her mother's service has been as completely accurate." Mrs. walked slowly to the front of the auditorium, her face streaked with tears. When she reached Emma's seat, she knelt down to the girl's eye level. "Emma, I owe you a sincere apology," Mrs. said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was completely wrong about your mother, and I was wrong to humiliate you in front of your classmates. Your mother is clearly an exceptional woman and a true hero." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "I realize now that my attitudes about women in the military were outdated and ignorant. You should be incredibly proud of your mother, and I should have celebrated her achievements instead of questioning them." Emma nodded graciously, showing a maturity beyond her years. "Thank you, Mrs. I forgive you." Mrs. stood and addressed the entire auditorium. "I also want to apologize to everyone here for my ignorance. These men and women have opened my eyes to realities I never understood. I clearly have a lot to learn about the modern military and the incredible contributions that women are making to our national defense." Commander Jackson nodded approvingly. "Mrs., we appreciate your honesty and your willingness to learn. We'll be leaving some educational materials with your principal that might help update your curriculum to reflect the current realities of military service." As the presentation concluded, the Navy SEALs spent additional time talking with students and answering questions. Emma was surrounded by classmates who wanted to hear more about her mother's service, their attitudes completely transformed from the previous day. Tyler approached Emma hesitantly. "I'm sorry about what I said yesterday," he mumbled. "Your mom sounds really amazing." "She is," Emma replied simply, "and thank you for apologizing." As the military personnel prepared to leave, Commander Jackson pulled Emma aside for a private conversation. "Your mother wanted me to give you this," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. Inside was a miniature version of the trident pin, inscribed with the words, "For my hero daughter who always stands up for what's right. Love, Mom." Emma clutched the pin to her chest, overwhelmed with emotion and pride. "Your mother also wanted me to tell you that she'll be home in 6 weeks," Commander Jackson added with a smile. "She's looking forward to hearing all about how you handled this situation." As the convoy of military vehicles pulled away from Riverside Middle School, Emma stood with her classmates and teachers, watching them disappear into the distance. The events of the past 2 days had changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed the power of truth and courage. Mrs. approached Emma one final time, as students were dismissed to return to their regular classes. "Emma," she said quietly, "I hope you'll allow me to make this right. I'd like to arrange for you to give a presentation to all my classes about your mother's service. I think every student should know about the sacrifices military families make." Emma smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with forgiveness and understanding. "I'd like that, Mrs. My mom always says that education is the best way to fight ignorance." As Emma walked back to her regular classes, she carried herself with new confidence. She had learned that standing up for the truth, even when it was difficult, was always the right choice. More importantly, she had learned that her mother's legacy of courage and honor lived on in her, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The manila envelope that had started everything was tucked safely in her backpack, but Emma no longer needed it. The truth about her mother's service was now known throughout the school, and the respect in her classmates' eyes told her that she would never again have to prove her family's honor. Her mother was a hero, and now everyone knew it.